thing, and then in the end of the lesson we can discuss and you can think those questions what we discussed.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say that this is the first time that I've ever given a talk under these kind of circumstances to a video camera and a video monitor. So I have put some things on the board which you probably can't read. So I'm going to just, this is also to help me so I can point to them and explain them. And I hope that you can follow in that way. So first of all, my name is Suhotra Swami, and I am of course a member of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, or ISKCON, or the Hare Krishna movement. I'm a disciple of the founder of that movement, whose name is, short way of saying, Srila Prabhupada. He is a spiritual master who came from India in 1965 to the USA and started this movement there, and then he went to other countries and spread it. Of course, now he's departed from this world since 1977. So what I'm representing to you is the Vedic explanation of what you might call a theory of knowledge. In other words, how is it that we as human beings can know or understand things and come to a higher perception of reality. So the information that I'm going to give you is all coming from the Vedic scriptures, which means the ancient Sanskrit texts of India. I am, however, in presenting this to you, I will certainly be mentioning some Sanskrit terms, and I hope that that doesn't confuse you too much. But I'll also be using modern Western, of course English, terminology too, because this will help you, I think, to understand better. But the basic schema of everything I'm presenting you is Vedic. And I think you'll find it interesting to note how much of this is in correspondence with modern theories coming from psychology and philosophy. But this that I'm presenting to you now is very, very ancient. It goes back thousands of years. So, I want to begin pointing to this board, not that anything here you can see necessarily, but anyway, it just has something to do during my explanation. I'm going to begin here. I've drawn a kind of little star figure and labeled it Atma. Atma is a Sanskrit word that simply means self or soul. And this is where we're beginning. That this is beginning on a transcendental, non-material platform of understanding of who and what we are. That we are, in essence, a non-material focal point of consciousness. This is the essence of the self. It is spiritual. Spiritual means that it has no beginning. The self has no beginning. It has no end. It is of the same quality or substance as God is. So without beginning, without end. But we are, each self is a kind of, like my guru, my spiritual master would say, a sample of God. Or a tiny particle of God's personal spiritual energy. So, this self, Atma, it has a particular power. And that power in Sanskrit, I put it here, Tatasta Shakti. Shakti means power. And Tatasta means choice. Actually, the word Tatasta gives the image of, just like on the seashore, you see the line where the water meets the earth. So on one side there's water, on the other side there's the sand. So this is like a borderline. So you can choose either to be on the sand or in the water. So Tatasta means choice. So this is essential to the soul. We can say this is This is the essential quality or energy of the soul, the power to choose. And then here, I have drawn another larger sort of star-shaped light. And I've indicated, you can't see this, I'll just explain it. I've indicated that this is even higher or in a more transcendental position than the soul itself. And this is the Paramatma, which means the super soul, which is actually a manifestation of God Himself, and that is with each one of us forever. And this super soul, you see that the Vedas say that soul is situated in the region of the heart. Not that we should think of the soul as a kind of organ of the body, because it is non-material. But the locus of the soul or our consciousness is said to be in the region of the heart. And this Paramatma is also there. So, the Paramatma is in a kind of union, in inseparable relationship with the soul. And this Paramatma is granting to the soul the field of its knowledge and its activity. In other words, I said, as soul, we're making choices. So what do we have before us to choose? What are the options? That is provided by the Paramatma. And this is going together with the doctrine of karma. I'm sure every one of you has heard this word karma before. You may not know exactly what it means, but karma simply means our activities which are carrying us from one life to the next. So as a result of our past activities in this life, we have a certain field of knowledge or activities. For instance, I think most of you were born in this country, in Finland. That is a certain type of field of activities and knowledge. You learned from very early the Finnish language, and of course there are conceptions, specific conceptions and ways of looking at the world that come with the language that you speak. So this is an example of what we mean by field. So this field is given by the Paramatma, according again to our karma. And the Paramatma is the inner ruler of our being. Just for example, in this body that we have right now, each one of us has a body. So there's so many things going on in this body which are necessary for our life, but we have not only no control over these things, we don't even know that they're going on. We're not aware of the beating of our heart from moment to moment, and the movement of blood through the veins, or the electrochemical reactions that are going on inside of our brain, or so many intricate little functions of this bodily organism. But there is a superior consciousness which is ruling over these functions, organic functions, and this is the Paramatma, the inner ruler. He is the overseer. He's seeing at all times everything that's going on within and without, and he's the permitter. The super soul is granting permission. Another example, sometimes we're trying to remember something that we should know, like the name of someone. We see, you're in school, you look down the hall, you see someone coming to you, you've met this person before, and you've been introduced, you heard the name, you actually know the name, but here the person is coming and you can't remember the name. And you're kind of, you know, how it is, you're sort of grouping somewhere in your mind, where's that name, where's that name, where's that name? So the name is there, but you can't get it. So this is the sense that there is a higher order of consciousness or intelligence in which all of our knowledge is reposed. And from this higher order, we are granted knowledge. And sometimes the knowledge doesn't come. Sometimes for some reason we can't understand, the knowledge isn't available. So these are just some basic introductory points I want to make about the soul and the super soul. Now I want to proceed. Around this Atma, Paramatma, I've drawn two circles. So the first circle, the inner circle here, this is called the mental body, or in Sanskrit, Linga Sharira. And then the outer circle is the physical body, which is labeled Sthula Sharira in Sanskrit. So this is very important for your understanding if you want to have a picture of what the Vedas present as we could call the hierarchy of the self or our being. That there is a soul and there are two kinds of bodies. Now this is not so difficult to understand. Just like our clothes, we have outer clothes and we have underclothes. The outer clothes everyone sees, but the underclothes no one sees but ourselves. So similarly, we have an outer body that everyone can see, the Sthula Sharira, physical body. But we have an inner body, a mental body, which only we are working with. And this mental body consists of three aspects. We're talking about something, of course, that's mental, so it's hard to talk about it in physical terms. I hesitate to say the mental body has three parts. And then you start thinking of it as a kind of machine or something made of three parts. That's not really how we should understand this. This is something very fine. It's the mind, obviously. But there are three aspects to the mind. And I want to explain them one by one. This is quite essential for your understanding. So the first part is ahamkara in Sanskrit, which we can translate as worldly ego or false ego. Because, as I explained, we are soul, we are non-material, purely spiritual, but in this world, that identity, that self, that soul, is identifying with matter. For example, someone asks you, who are you? This is a question about yourself. And what do you answer? How do you answer? You answer in terms of your body. You give a name that was given to your body by your parents when you were born. You give an address, which is a place where your body lives. We answer the question, who are you, in terms of the body. So this is ahamkara, which is the worldly identity, and also the worldly attachments of the self. We have our home, for example, the place we live. We're attached to that. We identify with that very much. We have our near and dear ones, our close family members or friends. So we identify very strongly with that. Our identity, our sense of self is mixed up with these things. So this is all part of the ahamkara, or worldly identity, worldly attachments. Then, the next aspect of this linga sharira, or mental body, is buddhi. We could translate the word buddhi as intelligence. This is a sort of approximate translation, as you'll see when I start to explain to you what this buddhi is. Because this buddhi, it first of all includes what we would call intuition, or rather instinct. Intuition, instinct, yes. This sort of very primal type of awareness or knowledge of things. For example, a newborn puppy, baby dog, it knows where the breast of its mother is. It knows where to find the breast of its mother for getting its necessary milk. This has been observed, and of course we have this word instinct today to describe that. That instinctively, the baby dog, firstborn, knows where to find its food in the breast of the mother. But this in the Vedas is attributed to buddhi. It is a type of intelligence that accompanies the soul, life after life. Also in this buddhi, we would include categorical knowledge. Categorical knowledge means that all the things that we're seeing at every moment, we automatically put into categories. Like I differentiate between a person that I'm seeing, and a machine over here. These are different categories, and we don't even think about it. We just instantly are putting everything. A pencil is in the same category as a pen, but not in the same category as a snake. Although a snake laying straight, a small snake, looks quite a bit like a pencil or a pen. But we have this immediate categorization. These are different things. So this also belongs to buddhi. Also in buddhi is what we would call abstract knowledge, which in the West we typically say is intellectual knowledge. So for instance, knowledge of speech, language, writing, theories, and so on and so forth. This is also part of buddhi. Memory is also attributed to buddhi. And one more thing I want to mention, memory and talking about memory, I just forgot. Let me look. Oh yes, determination. Determination, when one becomes determined to achieve a goal, and there are hardships, but we push through those hardships, we don't give up. This is also attributed to this buddhi. And then we have, so I've explained the ahamkara, the false ego, the buddhi, which we could call intelligence, and then thirdly, the third aspect of the mental body is manas in Sanskrit, which is usually translated as mind. So to manas we attribute desire, we attribute emotions, we attribute impressions. Now impressions, I have to pause and talk about that a little bit. Events are impressed into our mind and they stay there. Now you might ask, but here in the buddhi you've said this is the place of memory. So what's the difference? So there is a bit of a difference. That, as I said, I may remember a name, or I remember where I put something. But an impression is a sort of mental reliving of an experience. It has, there are emotions involved. There are perceptions even, like mental perceptions that are involved. Like if you can perhaps remember the first time in your life that you ever ate an orange. So as a child, an orange is a wonderful thing. And so if we have that memory, we won't remember simply the image of an orange, what is an orange, but we'll remember the opening of the orange and the particular smell that came out and the taste, this acidic sweet taste, and it was a very new and wonderful experience. So this is the sense of impression. It is memory also, but you might say memory in 3D Technicolor. It's a sort of reliving of the experience. And so that is attributed to the mind, which as I said, is the place of emotional life. And then, oh yes, the mind is what we could call the common sense. Now we use this term common sense a lot. Use your common sense. But technically what that means is that all of our sensory information, what we see and what we hear and taste and smell and touch, that's all being fed into one mind, one awareness. And this awareness is putting all of these impressions together in a coherent form, and this is how we're experiencing the world. So this is the manas, this is the so-called common sense. And also the mind is the place of our acceptance and rejection of what we experience or anything. There are things that we think are nice, are useful, are proper for us to accept. And so this decision-making is going on in the mind. And then there are other things, like places, people, whatever they may be, but that we reject, we don't want to be part of. So this is also an important function of the mind. Now I want to look closer at the mind. Actually, what I mean by the mind is the mental body. with all of these things working in it. Ahankara, buddhi, manas. I've explained to you the difference between the three, but you see the three are working together, and they're working together very closely. So when they're functioning together, generally we find again very often in the Sanskrit texts that all three working together is simply called the mind in a general sense, or the mental body. So this is what I'm going to be talking about now. Having explained these parts, now I'm just going to say what happens in general when these three aspects of the mental body are all working. And so there are three basic fields of mental activity, mental processes, and these are, and I've used some Western terms from Western psychology, and this is a big area of agreement between the Vedic presentation and today's Western presentation. There are three phases of mental activity, and these are called cognitive, affective, and conative. I'll explain these three briefly. Cognitive obviously refers to our thinking. Affective means the emotions. Just like we have in English the word affection. So when I'm affectionate to someone, that means I have an emotional bond to that person. So the field of the emotions is called the affective phase of the mind. And then finally, conative. This is the willing phase of our psychology. When we will to do something, when the senses, which are, we might say, the limbs of the mind, the senses like our hands and our legs and so on, they become engaged in doing things to achieve goals, what the mind wants. This is called the conative phase of mental activities. So today, I'm here to talk to you about the Vedic theory of knowledge. So I'm going to be just speaking about this first phase of mental activities, the cognitive phase. So I put some things on the board underneath here. You don't see them, I'll explain them. So in cognition, a very, very major part of cognition is observing. We have to see things, notice things, before we can think about them. So this contemplation of information coming through our senses, this is the beginning of the cognitive function of the mind. So we observe things in two ways. There are two ways that we can make observations of the world. One is basic perception, like to see something, to see a person across the room. But another way of observing is by logic. And this is connected. Logical functions are a kind of bridge point between observing or perception and another function of cognition, remembering. Because logic involves also what we have learned in the past, and it's combined with things that we're seeing now in the present, and we come to a conclusion about them. I'll give a simple example to distinguish between perceptual observation and logical observation. So I see a friend. So there he is before me. I know him by what I see. So that is simple perceptive observing. But suppose now I'm in my room. The door is closed. And I'm doing something, working on my computer. And then I hear a voice on the other side of the door calling my name. And I recognize this voice. This is the voice of that friend. Now I don't see him with my eyes. I hear his voice, but you know, it's not necessarily his voice. It could be someone else who is imitating that voice, or someone who has a tape recorder of my friend's voice playing it against the door. So I don't really have full perception that this is my friend. But he's speaking, he's saying, hey, we were supposed to go, I don't know, to the bowling alley at 6 o'clock, and it's now, 6:10 and you haven't come, so I'm coming to pick you up, let's go. So he says something that only my friend would say. So you see, it's a combination of what I hear and what I remember about him, and so it comes together as a kind of logical perception that this must be my friend. And this process is very much a part of observing. For example, in police work, the detectives, they will come to a conclusion by not only what they observe in terms of evidence, but by logic. They'll come to a conclusion that a particular person has committed a crime, although no one actually saw. There is no direct witness to that person having committed this crime. But there is a logic that can only point to this person, no one else. And that is strong enough to be accepted in a court of law. People get convicted on the basis of this type of evidence. Not only physical evidence, but logical evidence. Another example would be the electron. I think you all know that an electron is a subatomic particle. Now, in fact, an electron has never been observed. You cannot see an electron in an electron microscope or anything like that. There are simply indications, other sorts of evidence, that electrons exist, but no one has ever seen them. But the logic, combined with what you see, what can be seen, and logic, they've come to the conclusion that there is such a thing as an electron, and it's completely accepted in science. If someone would start to argue that I don't believe that electrons exist, he would be considered a little crazy among scientists, because they all accept electrons exist, although no one has ever seen it. So this is about observation, which is one of the functions of cognition. So again, two types of observation, by perception and by logic. Then, another type of cognition, or another department of cognition, is remembering, memory. And I already told you that memory is traced to up here in the mental body, buddhi, or the intelligence. So, you all know what memory is. I don't really need to explain that. But I do want to point out one thing, one interesting thing, that dreams, which are obviously a mental function, which happens to us all at night as we sleep. So according to the Vedic psychology, dreams are consciousness, because consciousness, as I said, originates with the Atma, or soul. It's the very energy of the soul. So a dream is the result of consciousness interacting with memory. At night when we sleep, then our consciousness is no longer being projected through the external senses. We're not, obviously, when we're laying in bed with our eyes closed, we're not seeing anything of the outer world, nor are we having any perceptive experience of the outer world. So what is happening when we dream? Our consciousness is engaged with the memory. And in dreams, you see, the memory is freely combining different images that are stored there. So, for example, you may dream of a golden mountain. Now, you have never seen a golden mountain. So how could that be a memory? Someone might ask. If dreams are simply the result of memory, then how could I dream of a golden mountain which I've never seen and therefore I can have no memory of? But you have seen gold. You know what gold is, and you have seen mountains. So the mind, at the time of dreaming, is combining these two memories to create a new image of a golden mountain. And so this is how the function of dreaming is explained in the Vedas. And there's also another function of cognition, which I have to jump to right now, while still on the subject of dreams, and that's intuition. So, to summarize, 3 main departments of cognition are observing, remembering, and intuition. Now, still before leaving dreams, you see, sometimes intuition bleeds into our dreaming. And therefore, the Vedas say it is possible, and we're not saying that this is a usual thing, but it is possible for dreams to be precognitive. Some people, and this has been recorded quite a bit in literature, whether or not you want to put a lot of faith into that literature, that's up to you. But it has been recorded that people have had in dreams, they have foreseen events. And I can give you an experience from that I know of personally, because one of my, we say god brothers, or a fellow disciple of my spiritual master, whose family, mother and father, lived in Chicago. So his mother and father, they died in 1979 in a terrible airplane accident at the Chicago airport. A plane, I believe it was a Boeing 727 with the three motors on the back. It took off, and then before it got very far away from the airport, it flipped over on the back and fell back to the ground. And everyone was killed. And the thing was, is that this has been verified by the press, that for some days or weeks before this accident, there was a man who kept calling the Chicago airport saying, I keep having a dream of an airplane taking off, flipping over on its back and falling back to earth. And that was recorded, those phone calls, reporters investigated it. It's a validated story that this person had that dream. And there have been many other stories, put in these kind of esoteric type of books. But they have, many of them have been investigated and have been verified that it's true. And of course, the explanation is wanting. But this is how the Vedas look at this. That we have this third department of cognition, which is intuition. And another name for intuition is, in Sanskrit, divya pratyaksha, which means divine perception. It is a kind of perception, but we might say it is extrasensory. You have this term, ESP, extrasensory perception. It's perception that is not depending on our senses. It is coming from a higher order of reality, and this is why in the beginning I took some trouble to explain this Atma and Paramatma. So Paramatma is the source of actually all of our knowledge, because he gives the general field of knowledge. But specifically, the Paramatma is granting, according to his sweet will, he may grant this divya pratyaksha, this higher order of divine knowledge. Of course, everyone has intuition to some degree or other. We have a sense about people, for example. When we meet someone for the first time, we don't know anything about this person, but we have a sense about them, that this is a good person, or maybe this is not a good person, someone we can't trust. We can't explain why we have these feelings. And of course, yes, sometimes the feelings turn out to be wrong. That's also true. Because one thing we have to understand, that when the soul is in this situation, as I told you, explaining ahamkara or false ego, when we're identifying with matter, when we're working with the mind, the mental body and the physical body, and when we're undergoing this repeated birth and death, the reincarnation of the soul from body to body, life after life. And then we are in a state which is called maya, or illusion. So we are subject to bewilderment, to illusion. So in this state, our knowledge, our perception, our remembering, our intuition, all of these things are imperfect. So I want to stress that very much. We all have intuition, but I'm not saying that our intuition is perfect. So this is what I've just presented to you. Oh yes, there's one last thing I wanted to say before coming to the conclusion. And I wanted to talk about the direction of knowledge. This is also important, that there are two directions of knowledge, meaning that knowledge moves in two directions. One is aroha, or exploratory. Aroha means actually ascending, going from bottom upward to higher and higher levels of understanding. And the other is aroha, or revelatory, means that higher order of knowledge also comes down to us by grace, by the mercy of someone. And so it's using both of these directions of knowledge, this is how we advance in our understanding of things. Some things we figure out for ourselves. This is aroha knowledge. You see, this is the in many mystery novels and mystery type films, this is the theme, that a person comes to know that everything that he's believed about, let's say, his family or his life is false. Bit by bit he comes to see, wait a minute, there's something wrong with all this that I've been told about who I am and who my parents are and so on, what my past life, the previous part of my life, childhood and so on, was all about. And so then he starts to explore, he starts to investigate. No one wants to help him. And it's a whole dramatic thing, you see, and gradually he's finding out the hidden truth. And this is a very popular theme in novels and movies. So this would be an example of what we call aroha, or exploratory knowledge. And then there's avaroha, revelatory, revelation. Knowledge is revealed to us. This is, for example, why you go to school. You go to school because there's a system for revealing knowledge which is accepted in the academic world as being the truth, or knowledge worth learning. And so there's a teacher, and there are books, and there is a whole tradition behind this particular subject. And so in this way, the knowledge comes down to you, the student. So finally, now I'm coming to the conclusion. This is a good point to come to the conclusion, because there is in Vedic language two words: Veda, which means knowledge, and then Vedanta, which means the end of knowledge, or the point of knowledge, the conclusion of knowledge. So this person standing before you on your video monitor, I am a practitioner of Vedanta. I have taken up the Vedic discipline which leads to the conclusion of all knowledge, the whole point of life, more or less, we can say. So, what is this ultimate conclusion of knowledge? And that is the liberation of the soul from this maya, which I told you about just a few moments ago, this illusion that we fall into by becoming dependent upon the mind and the body and the material world. So the soul is supposed to be educated to learn so that it becomes transcendental. It rises above matter and enters into this spiritual sphere, which is the actual right place for the soul to be. And this rising up of the soul into spiritual awareness means the reawakening of the relationship between the soul and the Paramatma, or the super soul. As I told you, Atma and Paramatma, they're always together, but the Atma has forgotten the Paramatma. There's a nice example given in the Vedas of two birds in one tree. The one tree represents the body. And in this tree there are fruits. Some fruits are sweet, some fruits are sour. That means the pleasurable and unpleasurable experiences that we have in this body. So of these two birds, one bird is very busy jumping around on the branch, tasting these fruits and finding, oh, this is a very nice fruit, oh, this fruit is bitter, I don't like it. And while he's jumping around tasting the fruit, the other bird is simply peacefully sitting there watching him. And the bird tasting the fruit has forgotten all about the other bird. So the watching bird, that is the Paramatma. So the Atma should become learned, should come to this spiritual knowledge that by which he rises above this attempt to enjoy matter and thus become forgetful of the super soul and even forgetful of himself as soul. He should rise above that and reawaken his relationship with Paramatma. And then he will enter into the spiritual dimension, and this cycle of birth, repeated births and deaths in physical bodies will stop. So this type of knowledge comes by way of this avaroha, or revelatory direction of knowledge. So for us, as practitioners of this Krishna consciousness, this Vedanta, then of the two, the avaroha is more important. Is not just more important, I should say most important. That doesn't mean that the exploratory knowledge has no place. We also use that, of course, but that's more in practical things. Our practical life, we have to rely on that. But in ultimate things, in attaining higher knowledge, then it has to be revealed. It has to come down upon us by grace. So just like in the university, you have your teachers by the grace of your philosophy teacher, you learn something about philosophy. By the grace of your history teacher, you learn something about history. So in Sanskrit, the word teacher is translated as guru, and you've all heard this word, guru. The word guru actually in the Sanskrit dictionary means heavy, as opposed to another word, lagu, which means light. So a guru is heavy, which means heavy with knowledge. This knowledge is not to be taken lightly. So we have to, approaching a guru is a very, very serious thing. And so when one finds one's guru and becomes his follower, his disciple, and then one will receive this transcendental knowledge, this Vedanta, by which the soul can rise above its entanglement and matter and come to its real self-consciousness, real spiritual consciousness, awareness of self as soul and of this eternal relationship that it has with Paramatma, Super Soul, or God. All right, so I think it would have been better if you would have been able to see what I had drawn on the board. When I walked in here, I didn't realize that I was going to be speaking to a video camera. So I hope that you were able to get some of this and that you can remember some of it. But this is my presentation on the Vedic theory of knowledge. So I thank you very much, and now I'll turn things over to the teacher.
It's okay, I think so. Thank you for your presentation, and like I told you, I shall give some copies for you. And now if you have some questions concerning this model and maybe those links between this GOK frame or some other links, you can ask those questions now. Yes.
Can you close the microphone so it doesn't echo? Okay, thanks. So if the soul of a human being is, I understood, it's eternal, and so what happens when the material body dies?
Okay, thanks.
Yes. So the material body, as I said in my talk, it can be compared to a dress that we take on. And this is according to the desires that in our life we are especially working on. Everyone has certain desires, and those desires that we are really focusing on trying to satisfy. This is setting up the next life, because as we're working, we're creating karma. Karma means we're creating activities, and also there are reactions to these activities. In nature, there's always, for every action, a reaction. So, as a reaction to our work in this life, trying to fulfill certain desires, we are actually creating now a next body. By creating it, I mean that our desires are being recorded by material nature, higher order of planning in material nature. The desires that we're manifesting are being noted, and they lead us to a body that is appropriate for those type of desires. So to give some graphic examples, suppose someone in this life having this human body, his great desire in life is to sleep as much as possible. In other words, he likes to sleep 16 hours a day. He's very slow and lazy. He doesn't like to do too much. And this is really what he thinks life is all about, to sleep as much as possible. So, this desire will be rewarded in the next life by an appropriate body. A body where one can sleep. I mean, there are forms of life, not necessarily in the human species. For example, a bear. A bear is known to sleep for 6 months a year, go into hibernation, and other such animals. So that's a possibility. So it's our desires. As long as we have material desires, desires that are focused on matter, then matter will respond, material nature, which is an energy of God, by the way, the energy of Paramatma. This material nature will respond by giving us another body as soon as this body dies. There's an example given of a caterpillar, or any type of worm that you might see crawling in a tree or on leaves. So the worm is on one leaf, and then its head sort of dangles over the side of the leaf and searches around, and then finds the edge of a leaf next to that leaf. And then it latches onto that leaf, and then gradually moves over. You see, this caterpillar has many legs, so the legs start moving, and gradually then it transfers itself from one leaf to the next leaf. So this is actually what we're doing right now in our present life, is by our activities we are transferring over already in our consciousness to the next body. And then at one point, just like the caterpillar, the whole thing is on the next leaf. So then at that point, that means we get that body which we're working on right now. So as long as we have material desires, as long as we have this material identity, this ahankara, as I explained, then we're always in touch with matter, and we will always be situated in matter in some type of body or other. And the present body that we have will just give way to a next body. It's a fluid transference, a fluid changeover, like crossing a bridge.
Yes, okay, thanks. Any other questions?
Still, should we now have the body that is appropriate to the desire that we have in the former life, according to that theory?
Yes. Yes. Now I should say, your question makes me want to add something, because if I simply leave it with desire, then one could say, well, I desire to be a millionaire. Why aren't I a millionaire now? So there's also the question of karma too. Karma, what we have done, there are good deeds, there are bad deeds, you see. So that all of that is taken into consideration. And you have what you desire, but also you have what you deserve. So we desire, but we have to accept a field. I explained that before. a field which is given to us from above. And then we try to satisfy those desires in terms of that field. So, someone may, of course, you interview people, everyone will say, I want to have lots of money. I would like, it would be great to have millions and millions of dollars, but only a few people in this world are so rich. But still, in whatever field people have, they do try to work and earn more money and get success relative according to their position. So the desire is always there, but it may not correspond so well with what we have done in the past, what we deserve now. So yes, it's true. A simple answer to your question is the body that we have now is the result of our desires and also what we have done in the past, and that leads up to this present situation.
Okay, good. Now, any other new questions? We have 5 or 6 minutes time, so if you have any questions.
I would ask something that you said that you know things through logic and perception. So what about emotion?
We know things by logic and perception, but what about emotion? So I was explaining to you the cognitive function of the mind. Cognitive means cognition or thinking or knowing things. And so again, there are 3 aspects of that: observing, remembering, intuition. So emotions belongs to another feature of mind, which is affective. And so in the affective function of the mind, we develop attachments. The emotions are the glue of our attachments. We become attached to persons. We become also attached to other creatures, to our pets. We even become attached to things by means of our emotions. And so this is a whole other department. This is sort of, you use the term TOK, theory of knowledge. So this is actually going away from the theory of knowledge. But emotions are actually central to all the functions of the mind. I said there's 3 phases: cognitive, affective, and conative. But of the 3, the affective or the emotional aspect of the mind is superior to the other 2. So when we talk about the cognitive function of the mind, emotions are also involved there. But I thought that was, that would just take us into too many other realms to get into that here in this talk. But since you brought it up, I can't say that emotions do play a very, very considerable role even in our thoughts, even in our knowledge. That's a fact.
Yeah, the question about breath stuff was, for example, inside IVTOK, emotional knowledge is one part of knowledge. So it also exists emotional way to know, it's one way to know. So it's also in your model, and they are not so separated.
Yes, yes. That's a good question. So that's the answer, that emotions are considered to be paramount in all mental functions. They dominate over the other 2. In other words, what we think and what we do, emotions dominate over all. So it's good to make that clear.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Any questions remaining?
Yes. Do you think it's possible to gain knowledge about the previous lives or the previous bodies that you have, or the surrounding areas that you've lived in?
Oh, you mean like déjà vu, isn't it? This is the French term for you go somewhere and you have a strong intuition that you've been there before, although you've never been there in this life, but somehow it's familiar to you. Yes, well, in answer to that, there is an American scientist named Ian Stevenson who has published several books of his investigations in this field. He has done research, particularly with children, because it seems children have the best of these sort of memories, particularly when they're 5, 6, 7 years old. And he's traveled around the world and interviewed children and their parents and gone with these children to these places where they have memories that can't be explained, in terms of this life. And he's seen cases where a child who claims that he remembers he used to live in another house with another family in another, like this, I'm thinking now in Ceylon, which is a country, but it's an island. So a child from one village claimed that he had lived in a previous life in a house in another village miles away. And so Mr. Stevenson, Dr. Stevenson, went with this child and the family to that house. And that it was amazing that the child was able to point out details of the house, tell things about his former mother and father. They were still there living in the house, husband and wife. Tell things about them which he could not have known. It would have not. He was just a kid, 5 years old, and he had no contact with these people before. And the people were saying, yes, it's right what he's saying. So Professor Stevenson, he is entitled one of his books, I think 21 or 26 cases, 27 cases, some number, 26 or 7 cases suggestive of reincarnation. As a scientist, he doesn't commit himself to saying that reincarnation is a proven absolute fact, but he says that there are these sorts of instances that strongly suggest that reincarnation is a fact.
Thank you.
So, thanks. It's 3 o'clock. If you have some very important question, okay, it's some sort of unique opportunity for you to ask. You can ask one final question, or shall we finish? It looks like that you don't have any more.
One more question.
Okay.
Do you always wear those clothes, or why do you wear them?
Yes. All right. So I am practicing a type of yoga called Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. And to practice this yoga, you don't have to dress in a particular way, but this type of dress is suitable for this yoga practice, at least. It is helpful in that it keeps my life very simple. It is also representative in Indian culture. This particular color is it represents, whenever anyone sees someone dressed in this color, they know that this person is on a spiritual path, and thus they deal with him in a certain way, you see. And so it sort of announces our purpose when we, at least in India, and I do spend a lot of time in India, it announces our purpose to the world at large, why we're here. Just like a doctor or a policeman wears a uniform so that everyone will know what he's doing. It's obvious if a policeman is there, he's on a certain purpose, everyone will know. Yes, and as I said, it's clean and it keeps my life simple, and I like it. And here in the West, although you're asking the question, obviously many people don't really know what it means, but still people have the sense that this must be something spiritual. And a lot of people, having learned what the Hare Krishna movement is, when they see one of us, they immediately think Krishna. Krishna is the name of God. We want people to think about Krishna and the name of Krishna. So this is also accomplishing our purpose by dressing like this. Our purpose is to spread this Krishna consciousness. So even by dressing, we do that. Well, thank you very much.
So, okay, let's give some sort of final applause for our guest. Okay, and thank you also from my side, and we shall meet in next week. Okay, have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.